Hey Downtimers, do you have miniatures with bent weapons, or do you have minis that you would like to bend slightly for a better pose? I have a few methods I've been using and a new one that seems pretty promising. But before I get too far into all that, I want to remind you guys to subscribe, like, and share. I don't market or advertise for this channel, so every sub and like goes a long way to let me know you guys are enjoying what I'm doing. And the more subscribers I get, the more encouraged I am to get more videos on the channel showing the latest projects that I'm working on every day. Okay, back to the topic. I'll start with the tried and true, but perhaps a little boring. The hot water fix is a standard for fixing bent miniatures, and it usually works fine. The only gripe I have is that it takes too long for the water to heat up, and I have a new water heater. And even with the water as hot as it can get, I still find some minis are stubborn with this method so that it takes much longer than it should. So this works, and it's safe, but it's slow. If you're like me and you have about a dozen or so minis you want to fix, or worse, reposition, you better plan on taking some serious time and a lot of hot water too. Seems wasteful and inefficient. So let's take a look at some methods that are faster but maybe not quite as safe. On more than one occasion, I've used a lighter to fix or modify minis. Without getting too detailed here, it's safe to assume this is by far the hottest of all the methods I've used, so it's definitely the fastest. But that's also the main problem. It's so fast you have to be extremely careful to hold the flame a certain distance under whatever it is you'd like to adjust on the miniature. There's definitely a learning curve. Also, it can quickly damage your mini and turn part of it black. So I'd only do this with expendable minis or ones I wouldn't mind further modding or kit bashing and repainting. And there's always a chance this method could produce toxic fumes, which is never good. Also, anytime you have an open flame, there's always some chance of a fire hazard. A quick note about the mini shown here, I used this lighter to fix his sword about a month ago, and there is some damage and the sword is discolored. I could repaint the sword, but it's not a big deal for this mini in my book, so I'll use as is. Because of the danger of an open flame, fumes, and potential damage to miniatures, I do not recommend this method. So let's turn the heat down some and try another method I've used many times in the past. The hobby tool I use primarily as a wood burner. This burner can get plenty hot, but it's not anything like an open flame, so it's not nearly as dangerous, but it can still do some damage, so it's best to be careful and cautious, especially if you turn the heat all the way up like I've done here for the first try. I found some cheap plastic soldiers that I thought would look a lot better with the guns aimed straight ahead, so I went in with the burner. I made the adjustments fairly quickly, but it also did a lot of damage, and there was plenty of smoke too. If you try this at home, I'd suggest burning outside with a fan, or at least with a window open and a fan. This method is good if you really don't care about ruining details on your minis, or maybe you're working on zombies or post-apocalyptic mutants or something like that. I set the temperature to around medium for the second soldier, and although it took a few seconds longer to make the adjustments, there was a lot less damage. Considering the possibility of dangerous fumes and damage to miniatures, I don't think this is the best method, but it can work at lower temperature settings for certain types of minis. Still, there has to be something better that can be used on all or at least most miniatures that need fixing or adjusting. It seems like water is the safest method so far, but the temperature just isn't hot enough to move through the process quickly, especially if you want to reposition miniatures. But steam is hotter than the hottest water I can get from my water heater, and it's still fairly safe. You don't have to worry about dangerous fumes, and steam has to be much safer on miniatures than the other methods I've used besides hot water. But using steam is awkward at best. How am I supposed to hold a miniature over a boiling pot of water without getting burned? What if I accidentally drop the mini in the boiling water? This method doesn't seem practical at all. But then I saw the wife using a handheld garment steamer and the light bulb went off. I read the box and saw that this steam-fast garment steamer supposedly emits 30% hotter steam. So even a hotter steam, and it's handheld so I can direct the steam. Yes! I immediately put it to the test with 3 minis that needed weapons straightened. The button on top has 3 settings. Setting 1 is in the back position and the steamer is simply on. Setting 2 is in the middle, and that's the low steam setting. Setting 3 is all the way forward and full steam ahead. So I plugged the steamer in the outlet, and by the time I had my ice water ready, it was warmed up and ready to go. The first mini had a rather stubborn sword that I actually fixed a few months ago with hot water, but it had somehow bent back days later, so I knew this would be a true test for this steamer. At first I thought it might be a good idea to place the weapon on the metal of the steamer, but I'm not sure that really does much. It's warm but not very hot. The best way to use this device is to simply cover whatever you want to adjust in steam. But even with my inefficient method, I was able to fix this stubborn figure's weapon in less than a minute. Next up was a female barbarian from WizKids Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures. Although she holds her sword with 2 hands, it isn't an extremely heavy or thick weapon for this size mini. I was determined to see how quickly I could straighten the weapon with a direct burst of steam, but the heat was almost too much for the sword. It was damaged just very slightly, but not enough to be concerned about. But I did learn that the thickness of the part to be adjusted should be taken into account before giving it a direct blast of steam with the setting all the way up. The steam is very concentrated, which is good for these type of miniature adjustments, but you have to be careful, especially with smaller or thinner pieces. The third mini was also from WizKids Nolzur's Marvelous Minis, and her weapon was a little thicker and needed a little more work, so I put the steamer on high, and the sword was ready for cold water in about 10 seconds. After the ice bath, the sword was fixed, and I was very happy with the results. The steamer was great at quickly fixing bent weapons, but how would it fare with adjusting miniatures' arms and such? That's certainly a tougher job than fixing thin mini weapons. So I grabbed a few more of my army men who really needed to be shooting at PCs instead of surrendering, and I started steaming. At first I was a little impatient. I know what this steamer can do, but I might not have realized just how fragile this plastic is. It's definitely not as forgiving. So I set the machine gun arm, which seems to be easier to adjust than the pistol arm on these guys, and then I started working on the pistol arm, but was a little too forceful, and it broke. Nothing a little glue can't fix. So now on to the next one. Knowing now that I need to be a little more patient and careful, the rest of the figures adjusted just fine. My only gripe about these is the cheap plastic these guys are made out of, which tends to show stretch marks as it bends, but I guess that's to be expected. And it's certainly nothing a little paint won't cover, so that's definitely not a deal breaker. Notice the second time around that I wore gloves. I learned another lesson about this steamer. It will, every now and then, vent steam, especially when you least expect it, and even have it on the lowest setting. So whatever you do, don't put your hands in front of one of these steamers unless you have on gloves. But having said all that, it wasn't a serious burn, and I did have my hands near the steam more than a few times, and this was the only time I was burned. So overall, especially when compared to the other methods I've used, this method is safe. The steamer method is number 1 now in my mini fixing world. Give it a try if you haven't already. You might find it as fun, fast, and effective as I have. This model is on Amazon for $39.99, but if you would like a smaller version for $20 or less, then there's that option too. The smaller model doesn't say 30% hotter, but I'd be willing to bet it works fine for fixing minis. Please subscribe, like, and share. Also, please comment and let me know what methods you've used to fix or adjust your miniatures. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.